Is it on now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It looks like it says it's coming in now. Look, it's the microphone is working. So, okay, so you can hear me now. Okay, can you hear me now, Sarah?
Yes.
Because all right. So we want this to work. And so before I forget, let's also go to the Catholic University of Korea here to do the smart attendance. They want the European Union to work, and that means they want it to bring peace to Europe. And peace to Europe means avoiding violent conflicts, and that means nationalism. And you know, it's an issue for this class because that's why one of the reasons why the European Union is studied, because it wants to encourage peaceful resolution of conflict, peaceful conflict resolution. And so you're reading about Spain last week, you know, that's been a case of conflict resolution that if you're going to explain why, for example, Basque terrorism, so-called Basque terrorism ended, or the Catalonian struggle for violent struggle for self-determination ended, one of the elements of your explanation has to include European integration. That's not sufficient for explaining European integration, but it is necessary. It is a necessary condition for explaining European integration, has to include for peaceful conflict resolution for Spain, or this week's reading regarding the United Kingdom and when it was a member of the European Union until it left several years, began to leave, I should say, in 2017, for resolving the violent conflict in Northern Ireland in the so-called Troubles, time of troubles between the Catholic nationalists and the Protestant English nationalists in Northern Ireland. A necessary, if not sufficient, explanation for that peaceful conflict resolution has to include the European Union, has to include Europeanization. And so when we look at this current war in Ukraine, that is an emergency, obviously, for people who study the European Union as well, because apparently the European integration and European Union as a representative of European integration has encouraged perception of threat in the part of Moscow, that the European Union is not a peaceful actor, that the European Union is somehow a threat to Russia. It's a threat to Russia and Russian nationalism because of the assumption that, for example, in this case, and this is what I'm arguing about and discussing a lot with my work at conferences at like where I was at in Nashville, is that this is what I have to present a paper on later on this month online with the University of Illinois European Union Center, on a paper I'm working on, that the European integration is built upon European nation states as its core foundation, that they need successful, strong states to make European integration feasible. And so, you know, European integration began with France, Western Germany, Italy, and Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So you need strong, effective states to implement European Union law and make European Union law. So that tends to recreate the nation state foundation within the European Union. So Ukraine and Ukrainian nationalists, people who self-identify with Ukraine, are attracted to NATO and European Union because they want their own state for their nation. Like we said, there's only about 200 states in the world, but there are thousands of ethnic groups. So even though people are divided into thousands of different cultural ethnic groups, linguistics groups, depending on however you want to define them, 3,000 to 5,000 different linguistic cultural groups, for example, there are only 200 nation states. And I mean, if you're a proud Kurd or a proud Albanian, you want your own state for your nation. It's a mark of for many different things, including safety, security, and also prestige and pride. If you have your own state in the world, and again, there are only 200 of them, you have the right to participate in the United Nations. You can become a member of the United Nations. You get to speak and declare and participate in making global policy for all of humankind to deal with, for example, climate change. Right? And Montenegro has its own state, which only has a few 100,000 people. Iceland has its own state. It only has 300,000 people. But Kurds, there are 40 million Kurds, and they do not have their own sovereign state. And if you're a proud Kurdish nationalist, that's going to upset you, irritate you. It's going to make you feel it's unfair, unjust, and particularly given how much your people have suffered and died. Oh, let's go get away from the Kurds, although it's still part of this course because Turkey has 10 to 15 million Kurds living within it. We don't really know because the Turks don't want to really count them. And Turkey has applied to join the European Union and is officially a candidate member to join the European Union. But like, let's say you're a Ukrainian nationalist. You want your own state. And you want it to be as big and powerful and strong as possible. And you were given this territory called Ukraine when the Soviet Union disintegrated. And you want to keep that territory because the more territory and sea borders and seaports you have, the more resources you have, the more you're able to build a safe and secure and prosperous community for your people. And if you're a Ukrainian nationalist, you probably feel very strongly about this, that you have been oppressed, like the way Kurds feel in Turkey and elsewhere, that you, Ukraine, have been oppressed by Russia. Russia denies you exist. Russia thinks they call you Mały Rusi, Malenki Rusi, little Russians. And you're going to fight and die for this. And of course, I know you're reading about Sweden and Great Britain this semester, but as I told you, any explanation as to why the fighting in Northern Ireland stopped largely, not completely, in 1998. So that's what, 36 years ago. Is that 36 years ago? See, that's 26 years ago, 24 years ago. Has to include European integration. Now, I know you were born, you were probably born in the late 90s. Yeah, I mean, you don't remember this. I'm an old man, but I remember the time of troubles in Northern Ireland. I remember when I was in school, when the Irish conflict became violent, copying from and borrowing from the civil rights movement in the United States. The civil rights movement spread to Northern Ireland, where the view of Irish nationalists is that the Protestant majority, the English Protestant majority in Northern Ireland oppressed the Catholics here and viewed them as, you know, the way basically Americans tend to view African Americans and stereotype them as backward, dumb, dirty, they're lazy, irresponsible. And the troubles began, it said, in the late 1960s and continued in 1998. And so when I grew up and went through school, I was always reading about and hearing news reports about bombs being detonated. And 3,500 people died here in this little area of about 1 million people. I think it's about 1 million. Do they have the population numbers here? I mean, at most 1 million people. That's a lot. And and you can see the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 was an agreement around Good Friday in 1998 that led to the largely ending the violence. And part of an explanation of the role of the European Union here was that this was all, of course, back in 1998. All of this, including Great Britain, United Kingdom and Great Britain, was part of the European Union. So as a consequence of the creation of the single market, and what are the 4 freedoms in the European Union's single market? Free movement of goods, capital, services, and people or labor. So eventually, there's no border here. There's no indication as a result of European integration over the years, there's no were no borders here. There weren't even any signs. You would drive, and the only indication you would see that you were moving into Ireland from Northern Ireland were that the signs for road speed were in kilometers per hour here and still in miles per hour here. But there used to be a time when in the 1970s, the British Army built these big surveillance units here. It with lots of cement and steel and surveillance towers with cameras looking for partisans, Irish Republican Army fighters coming, or terrorists, depending on your point of view, coming from here into Northern Ireland to attack the Belfast Ulster Constabulary, the Northern Ireland police that was dominated by Protestants, right? Sort of like Black Lives Matter complaints in the US about police treatment there. And now they're all gone. And so if you're an Irish nationalist and you're a Catholic minority, or they're becoming to be equal in population here, you kind of would like this all to be part of Ireland, but we all make compromises, and we're all in the European Union anyway, and and the economy is integrated between these areas, and there's no barriers, and okay, we're kind of like this, we'll accept this. And now they left the European Union. United Kingdom, UK. And so what to do with this border here? I mean, now there's supposed to be a customs border. There's no longer supposed to be free trade across this area, that the British are supposed to restrict entrance. Ideally, if the European Union, for example, does not allow free trade with Russia, because Russia is not part of the European Union. It hasn't adopted the European Union policies. It hasn't adopted the European Union obligations. So even though Russia has a border with Poland, in that little area in Kaliningrad, for example, you can't freely go back and forth across the border between Kaliningrad province of Russia and Poland and Lithuania. You can't. So this, highlights that with Brexit, that the big issue with Brexit, not the only issue, but the big issue with Brexit, is that the concern is that if you're going to put up customs union border posts here to check products coming back and forth across this border, that they're going to become targets for terrorist bombings. You're going to put up British customs police border units and outposts and stations, build them there again, and you know what? They're going to be attacked with bombs by Irish nationalists, because it reminds them that these British colonialists came here and established their empire and oppressed us Irish and made us backward and poor and let us die during the famine in the 1840s from the potato blight, and didn't do anything to help us, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a big topic of concern, that with Brexit, that I'm sure it highlights here the consequences of Brexit. And what does it say here? I haven't looked through this page this year so far, but I went on the plane back from US. I watched the Iron Lady with Meryl Streep, that film about Margaret Thatcher, and Margaret Thatcher was periodically her ministers were blown up by the IRA in the 1980s. One was killed by a car bomb. It's highlighted in the film. And then there was an attempt to blow up they did blow up the British Conservative Party annual meeting in a hotel, and they put bombs there and they blew that up. This is all 30, 40 years ago, when I was in college in the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher was prime minister, right? And so, I thought, and many people thought, they'll never pass Brexit. Brexit will not happen because, somebody once said, if you want to depress an American at a dinner party, because we all like to be proud of our nations typically, and we love America, and you love Switzerland, and you love America, and they love Korea. One way to make Americans sad is to talk about slavery and the legacy of slavery, right? Oh, I don't want to talk about that. You make me feel bad. We don't have any racism in America. You want to make people feel bad in a dinner party in Great Britain, talk about Ireland, right? And so we thought, I mean, there's no way they're going to separate. They're going to leave the European Union because the European Union has helped end this conflict that went 30 years. And this is a small conflict. And it took 30 years of intense efforts, not only by United Kingdom, but also by United States, Canada. They're all involved in these negotiations. And the European Union to stop the violence. Now you can imagine, you know, that's why I'm thinking about Ukraine. You've got 44 million people in Ukraine. You've got a horrible, incredible war that reminds me of what was going on in Bosnia 30 years ago. And once the violence starts, people's hatred, stereotyping, and hatred and emotions become much more intense, and it becomes really difficult to engage in peaceful conflict resolution. I mean, it took 30 freaking years here. And this involved the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, Canada, all of those resources. And it took 30 years to stop the violence. In this little area, I mean, there's only 5 million people live on this whole island. It's not even the size of Seoul in terms of population. So, you know, and again, so that's the context that the European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy, yet it's not so important to me whether or not the Russians are justified in believing that the European Union is a threat. The point is that they do think it is a threat, because unfortunately, as I told you many times, from the Russian point of view, NATO, European Union, both two sides of the same coin, and they think that the European Union is aiming to basically create Ukrainians in Ukraine, solidify Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian nation statehood, and that means take away the sacred land, the sacred territory, the cradle of Russian cities, Kiev and Rus. You know, Kiev, the capital, the medieval capital of the first Russian states established 1,000 years ago under the Varangians, the Viking conquerors, under Rurik. I remember because I studied Russian language and literature when I was your age in college. Under Rurik, and they established Kiev and Rus in Kiev. And that's where the Russians adopted Christianity from Byzantine, from Constantinople, and that's why they're Orthodox. And now the European Union is helping create Ukrainian nationalism that's going to take away the cradle of our nationhood. And you might say this sounds mystical, romantic, and that's what the New York Times says. Vladimir Putin has this mystical notion, but somehow we seem to accept that when the Israelis claim East Jerusalem and united it with the rest of Jerusalem as the eternal undivided capital of the state of Israel, and Judea and Samaria, you know, the names for the West Bank occupied Palestinian territories in the Bible, that's got 700,000 Jewish settlers have moved there, and the current government in Israel refuses to accept that will ever be given to the Palestinians. So we understand the case of Jewish Israeli nationalism, but we won't accept this for Russia, and we won't accept it for Serbia. And there are other cases too of territorial-based nationalism, you know, the concern is that, you know, basically as the conflict intensifies, like what happened with the Serbs, that Russian nationalism and nationalists will start seeing ethnic cleansing. They're going to expel the people that feel Ukrainian from the territory they control, and Ukraine will be partitioned. So this morning I was listening to Democracy Now! Again, and someone was interviewed, a Russian or a Ukrainian analyst, and now they're talking about a North-South Korea type partition of Ukraine. Like Korea, some kind of North-South. I think it'd be a little bit different because Ukrainian national identity is fluid. The core of it are intense Ukrainian nationalists, and they dominate the police and the army. And those are the ones that are doing the fighting and dying and killing. And they are the core. They're the elite mobilized fighters in the Ukrainian army that are shocking the Russians. But those people have a checkered history because they remember the help they got from the Germans during World War II when the Germans were, helping them fight Stalin. And so they don't have a negative view of what Hitler's Germany did when they invaded Ukraine 80 years ago, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if the Germans are going to help me against big bad Stalin in Moscow, the Germans are not so bad. So one of the main source fighter groups in Ukraine today is the Azov Battalion. The Azov Battalion is evidently the one military unit that is leading the charge against the Russian army, and they're fighting and dying and killing in Ukraine right now. And so, but look at their symbol. The Azov Battalion emerged several years ago in fighting in Donbass. It was 8 years ago in the eastern Ukraine when the Russians intervened to separate off Crimea. So here you see the Azov Battalion. Look at their symbol. What does that look like? Any question? Any guesses? And they are the ones that they're the fighters. They're the core of the Ukrainian army, of the new Ukrainian state that is emerging, right? And they're killing, but they're also dying. I mean, they feel committed, these people. And again, this all reminds me of parallels that happened 30 years ago in Bosnia, when you had Croatian nationalists. They don't have that bad view of the Germans because the Germans and Italians allied with them against the Serbs during World War II. And you see the same patterns emerge again and again and again here. For example, here, what did I want to show you here? I have another. I thought I downloaded it to the right place. Did I mess this up again? Just to show you, there was some kind of report here about, So again, the same kind of things. I remember 30 years ago when I was at the American University in Bulgaria, seeing this same kind of reports happen. Hatred, chaos, violence. The authorities, the government, they can't control what's going on the ground. There's chaos, confusion, propaganda, disinformation, killing, death, hatred. All of that goes together. And so you have these reports about, again, that the Russians are doing horrible things, raping, killing, torturing people, and then Russian soldiers that are captured being tortured and killed as well. This all happened 30 years ago in Bosnia. Pointing again to the atrocities being committed, and people are, I remember 30 years ago, you sort of know where this is going to end up. As the hatred and intensities of emotion and chaos and fear and insecurity escalate and build and feed on each other, that basically the end of this is going to be zero-sum output, basic partition of Ukraine. And if you're a Ukrainian nationalist, you're going to go live in the West. I don't think the Russians are going to try to take Lviv, the Ukrainian Catholic parts. They're not going to, I could be wrong, but I think they're not. They're going to basically end up partitioning Ukraine the way Bosnia has been de facto partitioned. And so, let's go back to talking about well, maybe because I want to also make sure that we get some opportunities to get some participation here. So we do a vote, and so what do you think? Please respond to the following statement. Make sure you can see this. So share screen. A peace agreement in Ukraine will require redrawing international boundaries between existing and new states in Europe to bring about peace in Ukraine. That basically we're going to have to talk about partitioning Ukraine. And it might well be that we have a new independent state of Western Ukraine, and this is going to be horribly violent if this is the way it's going to. But like in Bosnia, so I'm not certain. I'm just wondering. I want you to think about this. Basically, every hour that this conflict continues with more killing, more violence, more pictures of hospitals, schools being bombed, children being murdered, blown up, just like in Bosnia 30 years ago, that people, and it's not like even if Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, wants to compromise, he is politically constrained by Ukrainian nationalism and nationalists. He can't, or he'll be overthrown. If he compromises on, from a Ukrainian nationalist point of view, our natural God-given rights. We want a sovereign Ukraine that is sovereign. That means it's allowed to join NATO and the European Union and become a so-called peaceful, modern, developed European state, not some neutral state that is quasi-sovereign with Russian forces occupying. But no, no, no! And if anybody compromises, they're traitors. This is the mindset, the emotions that people have. And it's not just Zelensky, president of Ukraine, who's facing these public opinion pressures, because you cannot understand public opinion in modern politics unless you understand nationalism. Putin himself is being criticized in Russia by more right-wing figures for his failures in Ukraine. So he's constrained by Russian nationalist public opinion as well. But, you know, when you listen to the media and you read the media, they never cover this. They say, it's all Putin, 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 Putin. Like he's God, that he can do whatever he wants. He's not constrained by public opinion. He's in the middle. There are people far to the right of him who have a tremendous potential following in Russia. And that's what I've been arguing in my communication with people on Zoom over the last 2 months in this. But, you know, it's all Putin, 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 Putin. Like he can just do whatever he wants in this case. And, you know, and so let's see how you vote. So one other person hasn't voted. So, I mean, Zelensky and the Ukrainian government before him, there was an effort to try to resolve this conflict in the so-called Minsk Accords, negotiated in Minsk, Belarus, to, you know, allow the eastern part of Ukraine to have special quasi-sovereign powers to have a veto over Ukrainian foreign policy regarding Ukraine potentially joining NATO and European Union. And Zelensky wanted to implement that when he was running for president of Ukraine. And he couldn't do it because whenever he had tried to implement the Minsk Accords, Ukrainian nationalists would come to Kiev and protest. No, 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 he couldn't do it. He was going to be overthrown. So, but let's get back to talking about Sweden and United Kingdom. Now we've talked a bit about Sweden and about United Kingdom already a number of times in this class. But oh, by the way, if you're interested in what's going on in Bosnia, what happened in Yugoslavia 30 years ago, you can watch this nice video series that I used to show in my classes at the American University in Bulgaria.
Marshal Tito made his
about
final journey
the breakup of Yugoslavia
through communist Yugoslavia, the country.
And how, you know, this is, people were, you know, in the 1990s watching this happen in Yugoslavia. And, you know, keep in mind, this is before you were born, right? I was born in 1962. So when I was born, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened just a couple months after I was born. You know, my dad used to tell me, you know, John F. Kennedy came on television, he looked like he was going to lose it because we were at the brink of nuclear conflict with the Soviet Union. The point is, I grew up with the Cold War. For the first 29 years of my life, we had to deal with the Cold War. That's what I remember. ICBMs and nuclear weapons and pointed at each other. And, you know, and the Soviet Union is trying to take over the world. It's a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and they've got all these nuclear bombs. Can you imagine Hitler with all those nuclear bombs? The Soviet Union's got all these nuclear bombs. Oh my God, oh my God. And then the Soviet Union disappeared. And it looked relatively peaceful. This is before this war started here in 1992 in Yugoslavia. And so many Americans were so happy. Like, oh, the end of history, according to Francis Fukuyama. Oh, we won. democracy, capitalism, hooray, we're going to have a good time now. The whole world is going to be free from the last totalitarian threat. Yay, yay, yay. And then this happens. And then and Saddam Hussein also invades Kuwait to try to unify the Arabs under his own leadership, like Otto von Bismarck did with the Germans in the 1870s. And so this is a good video series based upon a book that was published by Laura Silber and Alan Little. And I think she's heading the Soros's Open Society Foundation today. But this is the book that video series was based on. And in case you're interested. And yeah, Yugoslavia, Death of a Nation. And the video series that's on YouTube, it's a BBC series from the British Broadcasting Corporation. They rebroadcast it in the United States on CNN, cable news network. But for some copyright reasons, they couldn't use the BBC's original version, so they gave the same script, the same words to Christiane Amanpour on CNN. So she's the one the voice they use to relay this on CNN, even though it was originally a BBC series. So Christiane Amanpour as the voice I remember, but I didn't realize that she just basically was reading a script that somebody gave her that was from this this original video series. And you know, that this
country he had created.
And it doesn't have the comment, it doesn't have the subtitles here, but this
For
is
35 years,
Tito's
he
death in
held
1980
Yugoslavia's
began all
6
this.
republics together with
So, and an important point here is that, of course, the blame, like today, Putin, bad, evil Putin, that Slobodan Milosevic, the leader of Serbia, Yugoslavia, was considered to be the bad guy. And during this time, and I just show you here a picture of him, and he was the president of Yugoslavia, and he was.
Postavili smo oficire Kosova na takim tačkama da nam osmatraju. Negde oko
I want to see you.
2
There he is.
sata
And there's the U.S. ambassador who made things worse.
se na graničnom prelazu nalaze najodgovorniji ljudi iz Ministarstva unutrašnjih poslova Hrvatske.
Okay. And so Slobodan Milosevic was portrayed in Western media reports. He's the bad guy. He's responsible for everything that happened. Bad, bad, bad. And then he was, when he was eventually overthrown, he was sent to The Hague to be put on trial by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, created by the United Nations, I think in 1992, United Nations Security Council. And he died before the trial ended. But all of the politicians, not all of them, but the ones who lead Serbia today, they're all his descendants, his children. Aleksandar Vučić is the prime minister, president, I think prime minister or president of Serbia. He was his minister of information. In other words, the Serbs don't view themselves as the evil bad guys, despite how Christiane Amanpour and the BBC and others portray Serbia. I mean, the Serbs think Kosovo is where they were born as a state. The Albanians moved in there, supposedly. They have so many children. We treated them nicely. We gave them autonomous status in Kosovo under Yugoslavia. And look what they did. They took away our cradle of our nation. They don't think they did anything wrong. That they're no more wrong than anyone else. Even though Warren Zimmerman, the U.S. ambassador in the Clinton administration, this is Bill Clinton, right? He's a politician who wants to show he's a tough guy, decided we're going to blame the Serbs as being primarily responsible for what happened in Yugoslavia. But the fact is, I mean, he appealed to Serbian nationalism to unify Serbs that they viewed were unjustly partitioned by Tito and the communists in 1944 and secretly drawing those borders. So yeah, he's the president of Serbia. And he was, it said, he was the minister of information in Slobodan Milosevic's government. He wins elections. that's an issue I wanted to highlight here, that we have to get away from focusing on who are we going to blame. We're going to blame Slobodan Milosevic. We're going to blame Vladimir Putin. That's, if you want peaceful conflict resolution, we don't first start on figuring out who's the bad guy. Who's the bad guy? Because if I want to find the bad guy, it means I'm more concerned about me than I am about the conflict. I want to find somebody, a bad guy, because I need an enemy, and that'll help me get elected as Bill Clinton, to show I'm a tough guy compared to George H.W. Bush, for example. And so, okay, so, well, by the way, you know, you read about Spain and Greece at the last class. Here's something that came out today in today's New York Times about how, thanks to, well, it doesn't highlight the role of Spain under the European Union, but that Madrid, Spain has become a rival for Miami as a haven for Latin Americans and their money. Miami, Florida was traditionally called the de facto capital of Latin America. This is where rich Latin Americans went to invest their money, to keep it safe, or to see that people that was embezzled or smuggled out of Latin America, that they would put the money in Miami, Florida. Now they're putting the money in Madrid, in Spain, and you remember that was an emphasis in the chapter on Spain about how the Spanish democratic authorities have really emphasized rebuilding relations with democratic Latin America, the way Franco had good relations with the dictators and military rulers in Latin America during the Cold War. So it says here, Spain allows Latin Americans to apply for citizenship after 2 years of legal residency, which is shorter than the normal 10-year residency requirement for other nationalities, or the 5 years for refugees. And so just to show you a follow-up, and I thought I would show that too because you just read that chapter on Spain. And so, of course, once these people come to Spain from Venezuela or Colombia or Peru, rich or poor, because lots of rich people are smuggling, or not smuggling, are taking their money out of Peru. Now these leftist governments have come to power in Peru and elsewhere. They're taking the money and buying it, you know, condos and real estate in Miami, but also in Madrid, Spain. So, you know, this just sort of ties in with what we were talking about last week. And so you can read that on your own, but to go on here, yeah. What's this? Why do I have this here? I'm trying to remember why I put this here. Something having to do with, of course, the, yeah. What is this? Why does it keep, so, yeah. So again, more people being killed, more anger, more fury, more disgust for the enemy. You know, that is all being shown up here in the CNN live reports of what's going on in Ukraine. And okay, so all right, so let's. Oh, I know what I wanted to show also, how this is important for your crash course on the role of Sweden, and make sure you can see this because again, it's not sort of going there. This report about you know, one of the great founders of modern Russia, of course, is Peter the Great, and Peter the Great decided to Europeanize Russia at the beginning of the 18th century. Peter Veliki, Peter the Great. And because, as you know, the Tartar Mongol horde of Genghis Khan and Subutai and the other Mongols and their Tartar sub-variation conquered Kievan Rus. They conquered Kiev, and they were under the Tartar yoke. The Tartar yoke, the Tartar enslavement for 200 and some years. Like the Bulgarians talk about the Turkish yoke. And then he decided, they were finally beaten by Ivan the Terrible and his father. They defeated and occupied the Tartars in the end of the 16th century. Then there was the time of troubles when Poland actually was powerful and strong. and Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, it was called, and they occupied Moscow for a few years during their time of troubles. That's the term they use it for, the time of troubles. And then during the end of times of troubles, the Russian aristocracy, the boyars, came together in a Zemsky Sobor, a land parliament, and elected the Romanovs as the new Tsar of Russia. All the Russes, that was Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. And then Peter Veliki, Peter the Great emerges as the Romanov, and he wants to Europeanize Russia after it's been separated from Western European interaction because of the Mongol-Tartar yoke. And so he decides to build St. Petersburg, named after him, on the border, what is today close to the border of Finland and Sweden, and to show everybody that he's made Russia great again, building this westernized government and adopting so-called westernized practices. He goes to war with Sweden. Sweden was a great power. And there's the Great Northern War. This is 100 years before Napoleon War. The Great Northern War between the Kingdom of Sweden and Peter the Great in Russia. But at the same time, Sweden was really cool at the time. It was considered to be the most modern, the most efficient state in the area. And so Peter the Great adopted Swedish best practices. Remember, talk about best practices in this class, to his efforts to reform and modernize the Russian administration. So he adopted Sweden's models for organizing their government in terms of departments, or what they used to call colleges. And then he goes to war with Sweden because he wants to take territory that Sweden was controlling, and he claimed for Russia. And this is that Russia's success is Peter the Great's big statement to Europe: we're back and we're here. And Charles XII was the king at the time, so there is a connection between this week's reading on Sweden but this war was really costly to Sweden. I mean, Sweden's a sparsely populated country, and they never really recovered from the Great Northern War with Russia because it was so costly. Basically, Sweden declined. It was no longer a great power. It was fighting on behalf of the Lutheran Protestant religious cause during the wars of religion and the 30 Years' War in Europe at this time. And it really knocked out Sweden. Sweden never really was a significant military actor in Europe after this, Peter the Great's Great Northern War. And of course, Ukrainian nationalists would tell you about Ivan Mazepa because they were all involved. Sweden invaded deep into Russia. They had a battle in Ukraine, lots of battles in Poltava, another Ukrainian city. So this is all tied up with, how do you have Russia separate from Europe? I mean, Russia is intimately engaged in Europe except for a couple hundred years when it was under the Tartar yoke, right? And, if you look at, the St. Vladimir Church in Moscow, that looks Asian, right? Remember the funky looking church with the onion domes? I'm not going to show the picture now, right? It doesn't look European, but St. Petersburg, that then became Leningrad under the communists, now back to St. Petersburg, it was all built to be a Western European type modern capital city. You brought in all these Italian architects to design the palaces there. So if you ever go to Russia, well, I don't know, I went to Russia in 1985, but St. Petersburg and Moscow look very different. And so so there is a connection. As I said, Sweden became basically a neutral power. And that's why Sweden, for example, to this day is not part of NATO. It did join the European Union when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1995, along with Finland and Austria, rich, developed European democracies. They joined the European Union before the conflict between the West and Moscow intensified, when that guy Boris Yeltsin was still president in newly independent Russia. But they haven't joined NATO. and because they've always been committed to neutrality after this horribly costly Great Northern War, and but now there's talk about Sweden joining NATO because of the reaction to Russia's involvement in Ukraine, along with Finland. Finland was also neutral. Finland separated, was conquered and taken from the Swedes and added to the Russian Empire, and then became independent when the Russian Empire collapsed at the end of World War I. And then Stalin went to war against Finland to take more territory to try to protect Leningrad because he knew war was coming. So more territory around Leningrad, St. Petersburg to protect it. So Finland and Sweden are both talking about joining NATO today. But Sweden is also relevant for this class because Sweden is one of the few European countries that still has formal diplomatic relations with North Korea. So you can see it here in this site that, that it says here, embassies. Few Western nations still have an embassy in Pyongyang, and the fact that Sweden does testifies of its important present-day role in the country. Through its embassy, Sweden represents consular interests in Australia, Canada, Italy, the Nordic countries, you can see them, and the United States. Sweden still has this position because as a country that's traditionally neutral, it was brought on to this supervisory commission whose job was to supervise the impending ceasefire of the end of the Korean War, to also exchange prisoners of war that were captured on both sides. So you can see Czechoslovakia, Poland, Sweden, and Switzerland are part of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. I think Poland and Czechoslovakia may no longer be there because after they democratized, North Korea told them to get the hell out of here because they're no longer communist. Have you been to the DMZ yet? The demilitarized zone? You should go. It's only 30 kilometers away. It's easy to get to. And you can still see, I think, that they have units, but it's strange. It's like, oh, we're out of time. That North Korea is still stuck in the Korean War. And so Switzerland and Sweden, and Kim Jong-un, he went to school here under a fake name in Switzerland. His dad sent him there to go study at some boarding school under a fake name, not under his real name. So, and because Switzerland and Sweden were part of this Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. So, and I think Bulgaria still has a formal embassy in Pyongyang. I know it does, in Pyongyang, where I was. So that's where we have to stop today, though. I'm sorry. I just want to get you excited about this class and show you the linkages between where we are here in Korea and between Switzerland, Sweden, and again, the neutrality of Sweden, traditional neutrality of Sweden, is one of the reasons why it was on this, it still is on this United Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, which may become more active as relations with North Korea become more of an issue, or more active, okay? Okay, so that's where we have to stop today. Any questions? If no, then I'm going to shut down the class because I got to set up the next class, okay? Bye. Bye-bye.